So Igor Chelenko is joining our broadcast, political analyst, head of the Center for Analysis and Strategy. Igor, hello, we're glad to see you.
Good evening. Hello?
Putin is at it again. That's what the Kremlin dictator said. The best place to meet with Zelensky is Moscow. That's what the Kremlin dictator said at the Eastern Economic Forum. In terms of actions, what does this statement mean?
Obviously, this is still a blockade of any further negotiation process. But today, I even suggested, ironically, well, let's say, even if we did go to Moscow, how would that be organized? Well, unless we just cram everyone into Air Force One as a joint delegation with Trump, so that the Americans would directly protect the Ukrainian leader. But since that's basically like walking into a lion's cage, well, that's absurd. It's truly absurd. And it in no way demonstrates any willingness on the part of the Russian Federation to engage in real dialogue right now. Moreover, I would like to point out that seven countries today are offering their services as negotiation platforms, neutral ones, places where there would be no risks related to the International Criminal Court or anything else, where there are good relations directly with Putin. But this doesn't suit Putin. You see, in his view and according to his words, there are excessive, not even demands, but there are certain standards of good conduct and so on, basically some basics of diplomacy, considering that Russia is the aggressor. Well, Putin goes on to speculate. Well, then we can suggest that he come to Kyiv, after all. It's the mother of Russian cities. So please, we're waiting, but definitely not with a parade. Let him come, and then we'll see. An equivalent position. It would be interesting to agree. Obviously, there's no point in expecting an answer. The question is purely rhetorical.
Well, yeah, if he's scared, let him bring a shaman with him. Let the shaman sing "I'm Russian" in his ear when he's at his most afraid. But seriously, these agreements, or rather these attempts by European leaders to organize some kind of security guarantees for Ukraine, trying to explain to Trump why all this is necessary. Tell me, what's the point of these discussions in terms of reaching an agreement with Russia if Russia doesn't agree to anything? In other words, Putin has made it clear, if troops from any foreign contingents are present during hostilities, they become a target for the Russian Federation. If they arrive after the fighting is over, what's the point of them then? So once again, there are simply no options. Is there, tell me, any kind of line after which our Western partners will realize that there's no need to ask Russia? Russia will always be against everything, against stopping the war, against foreign contingents. Do you believe that?
Actually, some Western leaders are already saying this openly. If I'm not mistaken, there was a recent statement by Mr. Rutte who noted that it's up to Ukraine to decide whether foreign troops should be here or not. Similar points have also been voiced by speakers from, I believe, the European Commission. Again, regarding a possible compromise, certain specific compromise points. Notice that President Zelensky said that Ukraine's membership in the EU is like a separate point in the security guarantees. And Putin, twice, once in China and once at the Eastern Economic Forum, noted that, well, in principle, that's the case, and Russia is not against Ukraine joining the EU. So I think we need to seize on this, show it to Orban, show it to everyone who keeps putting obstacles in Ukraine's path toward European integration. There you go, see for yourself. Even the aggressor agrees. So in reality, I think it's possible to find certain small points of contact, but that doesn't change the main thing. It absolutely does not change the undeniable fact that the aggressor relentlessly continues the ongoing war and has no intention whatsoever of stopping it. When there is no understanding of why European troops would be needed after the war stops, well, in fact, that's basically an admission that Putin will try to attack Ukraine again.
Recently, Europeans have had contacts with Trump. Trump also, as I understand it, spoke with Zelensky. So please explain, isn't there a danger that Trump, in yet another desperate attempt to find someone to blame for the complete failure of the diplomatic track with Russia, will say something like, well, look, here's Zelensky, he doesn't want to go to Moscow, what can I do? That's how he talks, right? Two kids are playing in a sandbox. One invites the other to his house, but the other doesn't want to go. Honestly, that's exactly what I predict will happen. Do you think about this?
Well, it's clear that there will be yet another wave of negativity directed at Ukraine. But by the way, continuing my half-joking idea about putting Zelensky on board the President of the United States plane, and what if we develop this idea further? What if Zelensky simply refuses to leave the plane? Roughly speaking, he would be on the territory of Moscow and, well, Putin would just board Air Force One accordingly. Such a compromise option is possible. Again, Putin won't agree to this because we remember when President Lula was flying from China to Brazil and spent more than 4 hours at the airport in Moscow. I don't remember if it was Domodedovo or which one, and still there was no opportunity for a personal meeting. And His Holiness Vladimir Vladimirovich did not even express a desire to speak with the president of Brazil. Well, nevertheless, it's clear that in the current situation, we've already done the maximum we could. The maximum, meaning what depended on us, discussion, coordination, making political decisions regarding the general framework, the framework of security guarantees that has been done. Ukraine in no way slowed down this process. On the contrary, we accelerated it as much as possible. Plus, right now, we are actively engaging with the international community in order to push forward the negotiation process. But unfortunately, instead of seeing a willingness from Russia, we are witnessing, on the contrary, a complete blockade of the entire process. And what does that mean? Well, obviously, I don't think there's any point in directly urging Trump to do something, but perhaps it's worth appealing to Melania Trump or maybe seeking out other nuances through the clergy, but at least showing what is actually happening right now. After all, Putin has no intention of stopping. He has openly stated that he will attack Ukrainian power grids, our system, and will try to plunge all of Ukraine into darkness. In other words, these are direct statements about future crimes against humanity, against the Ukrainian people.
Once again, Zelensky said that security guarantees for Ukraine must be implemented immediately, without waiting for the cessation of hostilities. It is important that the security guarantees promised by the countries in the coalition of the Resolute begin to take effect immediately, without waiting for the end of the war. Tell me, please, will the Europeans agree to this? Will there be, aside from the statements you've already mentioned, like Mark Rutte's, for example, that this is Ukraine's business? But we understand that Mark Rutte does not make the decisions, right, about deploying this or that contingent. For that, a decision by the majority, if not all, of the alliance members is needed, or at the very least, by this new coalition of the Resolute. What do you think? Will they go for it? Especially after hearing Putin's statement that if you come in, you will now become a target for us. So will they be able to overcome this fear? As an expert, what's your prediction, even in the context of a forecast?
Actually, there's no need to make any predictions here. Everything has been clearly stated and announced. French President Macron said that security guarantees for Ukraine will take effect on the very first day the war stops. In other words, this is exactly the current attitude of the coalition of the willing, the coalition of the determined, and so on. And in this case, of course, President Zelensky is right in the sense and in the aspect that it's definitely not worth waiting. Instead, all possible resources should be used to the fullest to support the effectiveness of Ukraine's defense forces. And let me remind you that at the core of security guarantees lies precisely the issue of supporting Ukraine's defense forces. That is, this is the foundation, because obviously no one will want to fight for us. So the question is, what is the equivalent of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty? What is the equivalent? After all, it essentially lays out the principle of one for all and all for one. But if no one is going to fight for their ally, then what kind of guarantees are these? On the other hand, of course, supporting Ukraine's defense forces is an important aspect that truly needs to be planned for many, many years ahead, since this very factor will serve as a preventive shield against new aggression. But at the same time, of course, we also need to think about how to stop the current aggression. And in my opinion, in this case, the best sanctions and the most effective deterrent is still the strength of Ukraine's defense. Our hip strikes, like the Ryazan oil refinery, the temporarily occupied Luhansk, and many, many other targets that are now in the sights of our drone operators.
By the way, regarding the shelling of Russian oil facilities, many experts predicted that after Robert Fico's visit to Ukraine and his conversation with Zelensky, he would try to somehow convince the Ukrainian leader that striking oil facilities is not necessary. Either there would be some threats or certain conditions. So, based on this, what do you see? First of all, did they try to influence Ukraine? That's the first point. Secondly, is it working?
Well, regarding Fitz, I think that in the conversation that already took place with President Zelensky, it's obvious that there were some parallel points, similar to Putin's threats about the Ukrainian energy system and attacks on it. Of course, it's clear that Fitz could and probably did bring up moments in that conversation like, You see, Ukraine is, let's say, maybe just a couple of steps away from a blackout, and then Slovakia will disconnect the interconnectors. Well, that's just an element of political pressure, right? The fact that it has no real foundation is a secondary matter because, well, these are companies, individual companies that are making crazy money right now from this electricity. By the way, according to the recently released August data, Ukraine actually ranked among the top 5 nations in terms of electricity prices, a significant economic indicator. And this just shows that we are fully paying for the imports that are coming in. And by the way, also exporting during certain hours when solar and wind energy make it possible. But nevertheless, I truly think that Fico is still not as, excuse my language and bluntness, fanatical and extreme as Orban, because at least when it comes to the crucial matter of European integration, we do indeed have significant support from the current Slovak government. And that means there are still some important and common points of contact and understanding between us. And even on the issue of Russian oil specifically, let me remind you of Donald Frederick Trump's position. The European Union should stop buying Russian oil. And that means either Slovakia completely leaves the European Union, and then by all means, you can certainly buy as much as you truly desire, or we still absolutely need to act together somehow, not just within the broader European community, but also within the comprehensive Euro-Atlantic framework, which is incredibly important. And considering Fico's relationship with Trump, it would be foolish to disregard the position of the 47th President of the United States.
Again, American media report that Trump is now looking much more closely at the possibility of ending the Russian-Ukrainian war. More soberly, I would say, Trump has not abandoned the idea of resolving the conflict through diplomatic means. On Thursday, as we already mentioned, he held a video conference with the president of Ukraine and European leaders. But in addition to everything else, Trump emphasizes that it is very important to increase pressure on China. He emphasizes that Beijing supports Russia's military actions and should face economic consequences for this. Tell me, please, does the United States actually have any real leverage to threaten China right now, not just in theory? Are there any real tools that could limit China's support for Russia?
Trade, once again, it's about trade. As Trump said, China needs the United States more than the other way around. That is actually true. Despite the grand parade and despite all of President Xi's significant statements about how we are now truly at a critical crossroads, either peace or war and so on, but still, the American market remains China's second highest priority after the European one, and therefore any substantial changes in trade relations will seriously and directly impact China in a profound way. Plus, right now, the United States of America continues to be actively engaged in ongoing negotiations with Beijing regarding the precise terms of trade between the two significant countries. I think that it is precisely in this particular area that there are the most significant and pressing questions, and it's entirely possible to create a considerable amount of complex problems directly for China, despite their cautious and somewhat hesitant wait-and-see stance that they have clearly preferred to take lately in recent times.
We'll see. Thank you very much, Igor, for joining us on the air. Igor Chilienko, political scientist and head of the Center for Analysis and Strategy, was on the air with Ukraine Today. All the best.
Thank you very much for your kind attention and consideration.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.